Hi, my name is Delano Athias. I'm a lead rigger and animator at Zoic LA, and I'd like to just go ahead and walk you through a rig that I built recently in Houdini. First, why did I do it? Well, I just wanted to explore the character rigging features and animation features that Houdini has to offer. I mean, I really love the program. I wanted to see what kind of fun stuff we could do on that side. And I was really happy with the results and how user-friendly the tools were. And there were some things that I wish were a bit different, but for the most part, I thought that this was a really great character rigging and animation solution. And yeah, so I'd like to go ahead and cover some of the techniques and workflows I used to get to this point. And obviously there's animation. So I'll go ahead and talk some about my process for that. And on top of that, you'll notice that there's also a bit of CFX. So I've simmed the character's cape. So we can get into a little bit of vellum as much as we can in this short segment. And then to top it off, we could go ahead and talk about camera animation and how fun it is in Houdini by using motion effects to add a handheld feel. So yeah, really fun stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the very beginning of this and we'll go ahead and get started. So first things first, when I brought in this model, I basically found this model online. It was an FBX file and I just went ahead and imported it in and got started that way. And just to backtrack a bit, before I actually brought it into Houdini, I did make sure that the size was convenient for any extra work we would do in Houdini, meaning CFX or anything like that. So I actually brought it in to a program like Maya and scaled it down so that when we brought it into Houdini, again, the scale was nice and convenient for other tasks that we might do with this character animation. Because remember, Houdini works in meters, so we just want to make sure that, you know, our scale is good to go on that end. So with that being said, I'd now like to go ahead and just talk about a few of the scripts that I used to basically set up these control objects and to lock the controls. And this is something that Michael Goldfarb covers in his rigging course. You can go ahead and have a look at that. And I also cover it in mine as well, which is the course again prior to this one at my last Hug event. But just to give you an idea of what the code looks like, I'll go ahead and open up Visual Studio here. And here is the rigging nulls script. And I actually prototyped this in Houdini first, which we could do by going to Windows and using the Python source editor. So I actually got started here, and once I was satisfied with it, I then brought it into Visual Studio. And what's nice about doing it this way is obviously some really nice features about Visual Studio that allows us to very easily edit this. But on that note, it's nice that we can actually go ahead and build it from here in the Python source editor. Now keep in mind that if you do build your script here, it is going to live in the scene. So you'll see that I've actually created Python definitions here and in the other script that I used for locking channels. Again, this is something else you can learn in Michael Goldfarb's course and my course again prior to this animation session. But here, you can see I'm actually defining some of the functions that I like to use to lock certain channels. So if I just go to bring this one over, let's go ahead and copy this and paste that into the source editor. All right, great. So what this does, OpenTR, is it will leave open my translation and rotation channels for animation, and all other transform channels get locked. So you can see here, scale is locked, pivot rotation, and the uniform scale as well. So to have a close look at this, what we're basically doing is we're importing in the Houdini command module, And then we get right in and we say, hey, let's go and create a definition. Now you'll notice that if I go ahead and try to use this, let me go ahead and show you this in action. I'll just go ahead and hit the tab key and type in null just to create a transform null. And this is what I'm basically using for my controls. And this is something else I really love about Houdini, the fact that we can use these for our control objects because it's very easy to go in and customize the display. We would basically head over to miscellaneous and we can go ahead and choose something like circles, and now it's represented as a sphere. And you can see I'm using that in a few areas on the control rig. And then I could go ahead and turn on shaded if I'd like. So again, super convenient stuff to save us a lot of time from having to build this ourselves. But getting back to this, if I go to the transform tab here, watch this. If I go ahead and just click on apply, nothing's going to happen. Because again, I'm defining this, but I haven't actually told Houdini to actually run the script. So all I have to do is go ahead and copy the function name, OpenTR, with the parentheses. I'll go ahead and press Control C. I'll go to the very end of the code. I'll hit enter on the keyboard to shift this down a few lines, and then hold down shift and press the tab key to go back to the first space, and then press Control V to paste. Now that I have this added, now watch, when I go ahead and click on apply, it's going to do exactly what we have told it to do here. It's going to lock anything except for the translate and rotate channels. So to kind of break down what's happening here is we basically search for our selection. So that's what this top line does. And we store that in a variable. And then we create a tuple, so just a list of all of the channels we'd like to lock. And we store that in a variable. Now we get right into a for loop that says, hey, for each item in our selection, so for each in OBJ, which stores our selection, and then for each of our parameters in our variable params, go ahead and basically go through that list and lock those parameters. So that's essentially what this script does. So super convenient stuff. Now, I can access this outside of the Python source editor because I've made sure to save the script in a directory that Houdini recognizes. Now, how do we find that? Well, let's go ahead and actually build this here. So I'll just go ahead and clear out the Python source editor. But keep in mind that, again, if we save our file, this is going to be saved as well. So if you do decide to save your script, just go ahead and make sure that the script will not run when Houdini is open by just removing that line and leaving the rest. All right, sweet. And then you can go ahead and click apply and accept and then just save your file. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear this out. And in order to find the directory or directories we can use to save our scripts, we could basically go ahead and import in our system path or access our system path. So I'm going to go ahead and type in import sys to access the system module. And then what we can do is create a variable that points to our system path. So I'm just going to go ahead and name that paths. And we'll have this equal to sys.path. Now we're going to go ahead and create a for loop that says for each of these paths, go ahead and return for me where they exist. So we'll go ahead and type in for, and then we'll go ahead and create a variable for the for loop. We'll just name it path. We can see the variable that we're going to access inside of the for loop. It's plural. Named it paths. For the variable in the for loop, we'll just go ahead and use the singular form, which is just path. So for path in paths, plural, we'll now add a colon. We'll hit enter to move down to the next line. And very important with Python, for this for loop to work, we need to add an indent with the tab key so that Python knows what to do inside of the for loop. So again, that indent's necessary. So for path and paths, simply print path. Singular, not plural, right? So we're printing the variable here. the for loop variable that points to our paths. So that's it. If I go ahead and click on apply, here in the Houdini console, now I have access to where I could go ahead and save those scripts. So you can see I've actually chosen this path here, and I'll show you how that looks. I'll just go ahead and close this out and go back to Visual Studio. And there you go. So you can see where I'm saving my scripts so that I can access them. Now, how do I access them in Houdini? So we have one of a few ways. We can go to the Python shell to do it, but let me go ahead and show you how we can create a shelf button to access this. So I'm going to now show you my rigging null script, which is, again, a cool idea I got from Michael Goldfarb that I added a little bit more to. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that script now. So this, rigging nulls. And note the name of this. It's rigging nulls, right? Because we're going to use that for our shelf button. Also note the definition here, because we're going to use that as well. All right, sweet. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this, and we'll go ahead and right click and choose New Tool. And I'm going to go to Script, and I'm going to import in that script that I've saved in that Python directory. So import rigging nulls, which is the name of the script. And then if there are any changes made, it's a good idea to use the reload function. So I'm going to go to the next line by just hitting enter, and I'm going to type in reload. So reload rigging nulls. And that way, again, if this gets updated, it will update here, so I'm not using old code. And now we'll go to the last line, and this is where we'll actually access the function in the script. So this is going to be rigging nulls, which is the name of the file, dot, and then we'll go ahead and type in rig nulls, open and close parentheses, which is the function inside of the script to actually run this. Yeah, so there you go. That's all there is to it. So now if we go back to options, we can go ahead and give this a name. So we could always call this rig nulls. I'll go ahead and press Control A to highlight this and Control C to copy, and then go to label, paste, use that for the label as well. And then, yeah, that's it. I'll just go ahead and now click on apply and accept. And there you go. Now we have a really cool button on our shelf. So if I were to now click on this, take a look at what has happened. I'll go ahead and press spacebar G. And as you can see, we have that hierarchy we had to look at in the script, where any offset values that existed on my main null here that I want to animate with, any of those offset values have been transferred to the very top, which is the connect locator that we would use to connect this to the rig. So if this was for an arm control for inverse kinematics, we can go ahead and basically parent this by clicking on the top port. We can basically left click and then add this to the global node. Here it is. I'll just go ahead and left click to get it connected. That way it will come along for the ride. So as I start to kind of translate this, that will start to move along. And if I start to scale this, it will be resizable as well. So that's basically what this does. It's creating a hierarchy for me so I can go ahead and store those offset values here. But then I can offset this even further. So if I decide to, let's say, space switch this so that I get to choose my parent space, or if I decide to add a cool automated function for, let's say, breathing, if this was for the character's rib cage, I could go ahead and do cool things like that here. And then when I'm ready to animate, I would actually use this null here, which I like to actually rename with a suffix of anim. So if this was for, let's say, a chest control, this would be chest underscore anim. And then you can see that it's added that digit at the end because I already have that as a name for my chest control. So it's just avoiding that name conflict. But if I'm looking for this naming convention now, I could use the / hotkey here in my node view, and I could just go ahead and type in anim to search out all of those nulls. Sweet, so really convenient stuff. So I just wanted to show you how that script works. But we're just going to go ahead and move on from here because we have more stuff to cover. But really helpful stuff. So now I'd like to go ahead and talk a bit about the bone objects that I'm using here. So we can go ahead and focus on the legs. And again, as you can see, the legs are actually stretchy, which is nice. So to set this up, I first set up the segmented chain to stretch, because that's really straightforward. And then it requires a little bit more work to get the main chain to stretch. And what do I mean by the main chain? Well, let me go ahead and show you. I'll go ahead and search out my leg chain here. And as you can see, I've hidden a few of the primary bones. So these bones here for the leg, and let me go ahead and hide the geometry so you can see this. So these bones drive my twist bones. Right, the twist bones are there so that I can get better volume when I start to move the legs and arms. And you can also see I'm using that for the spine as well. So really cool stuff. And again, you can learn more about that in Michael Goldfarb's course or in my rigging course prior to this session. But either way, I'm going to go ahead and now hide these, and we'll come back later so that you can have a look at how those are getting stretched. But for these, I'll go ahead and show you quickly how we can go ahead and set this up. If I were to go to the side view with spacebar 4, you can basically go in and hit the tab key and type in bones to access our bone tools. And I really love the bone tools here in Houdini. It's just very user-friendly. If I want to, I can create a naming convention. So I'll go ahead and use L underscore and then leg. That way, Houdini will identify this as the left leg, and when I'm ready to mirror, because I'm using a naming convention that Houdini likes with the L underscore, it'll know what to search for and what to replace when I mirror this across. Sweet. So now what I could do is go ahead and start to click to create a chain. So I'll go ahead and left click on the grid. Now something else to keep in mind is I can have this snap to my geometry if I want. So if I go ahead and bring my geometry back, notice right here under placement it's set to view base. So this is actually going to snap to my geometry. So if I go ahead and now right click and choose finish drawing, and I jump to my perspective view, so there's the new chain that was added. But if I go ahead and jump to my perspective view with spacebar 1, see it's been snapped to my character's leg, but it's at a kind of a slant, and that slant can be very messy for inverse kinematics. That's why I prefer to just go ahead and keep the chain straight and clean. So we'll just go ahead and remove that. Just wanted to show you how that works. But I'll press spacebar 4 to go back, and what we'll now do is switch this from view base to freehand. So this will just snap to the grid. So I'm using the same naming convention, and I'll go ahead and click. And before I click again, notice I can use the middle mouse button and scroll up to segment this. So that's something else I find very convenient. Now I could just go ahead and left click, and there's that segmented chain. And now I can go ahead and right click and choose finish drawing to make sure I just end up with this. I'll also hit escape to exit the bones tool. All right, so here's this really cool chain we end up with. And now what we can do is go ahead and jump back to our perspective view with spacebar 1. So at this point, what I'd now like to do is basically create a way to control this with a path. So again, very straightforward. What we'll do is press the tab key and then simply type in path, and we're looking for path create. Now we're in a pick session. We need to go ahead and choose where we want these nulls to end up so we can start to drive this chain. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on point snapping over to the left on the toolbar, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the top point and then click on the very end of my last bone here, and it will align itself to the bone system, which is nice, but it's also according to our view as well. So do keep that in mind. So I'm going to right click and now click on finish drawing, and there you go. So as you can see, we have this really cool control system. And just to kind of show you how this works, if I go ahead and press the S key to go to my select tool, I can now select this top null named path CV. and I'll press the T key to grab my move tool. There you go. So as I start to move it, we get some really flexible results. And this is what I'm actually using for not only the legs, but obviously the spine. I'm making sure it's stretchy, right? So here's how this looks deformation-wise. If I go ahead and take this chest control and I start to pull at it, see how nice and organic the deformations are. Let me go ahead and turn off point snapping. Yeah, so really fun stuff. I can go ahead and take the hips and pull these as well. So yeah, it's super fun stuff for character animation. Flexible characters are always fun, right? All right, sweet. So going back to this chain now, how do we assign this? Well, again, it's really straightforward. All we have to do is hit the tab key, go back to our bones tool. Now, let's go ahead and switch kinematics to follow curve. And all we have to do is go ahead and right click and choose add kinematics. Now we're in a pick session. We have to choose the first bone in the chain to assign our path to, and then we'll hit enter. We'll go to the last bone in the chain, which ends the system, and we'll go ahead and hit enter on the number pad. And we now need to choose our path, which is named path 1 here. So I'll go ahead and grab that and hit enter again on the number pad. And as you can see, the display of our bones have changed slightly just to let us know that they have now been bound to another node, which in this case is our path. Let's watch. We'll go ahead and press the S key to go back to our select tool. We can now go ahead and select the top CV. I'll press the T key and I'll start to pull at this, and there you go. We're starting to get a really nice pull, and I'll do the same thing for the bottom. Now you can see the top isn't quite moving correctly, right? You can see that it is deforming, but we want the top to actually start to move, that top bone to move. So what do we need to get that to work? We essentially need to control the CV, the path, as well as the top bone object, which is conveniently stored under this null here, or the acting parent, which is really nice. Again, another thing I really enjoy about Houdini, how it kind of organizes its bone objects. All right, sweet. So to get this to kind of pull around, what we can do is this. We can go ahead and press the tab key and create a null. And I'll just go ahead and name this control. Sweet. And now let's go ahead and align it to this null here. So a quick way to do that is this. As long as this is at the origin, you'll notice that if we go to path CV, we could actually see its offset here in 3D space. So a quick tip to align this, one way we could do this is this. All we have to do is parent our new null, again making sure it's at origin and that we don't turn on key position when parenting. We could just go ahead and take this and store it underneath path CV1 and take a look, it's now aligned. So if I go ahead and hide path CV1, there is our new null. Sweet, so that's very convenient. It's basically connecting itself to the parent space or transform space of path CV1. So now, to make sure it gets disconnected, because we want this null to control path CV1, I'll go back to null here named control, and I'll go ahead and turn on key position when parenting. I'll hold down the Y key and I'll left click and drag to disconnect the null. Sweet, so now you can see we have some messy transforms here, but no worries, we could go ahead and clean that up very easily. So with this null selected that has all of these transforms, this is the transform offset, meaning if we hold down control and we middle click on translation and rotation, it's going to pop right back to the origin. Sweet, so that's basically how that works. I also like to make sure the scale is clean, so I'm going to set that to 1. All right, but if we want to now, we can go and clean up these transforms by going in and clicking on Clean Transform here at the very bottom. Now it's basically hiding all of those offsets and swapping them with something that would be very nice for animation. So these values of 0 and 1, it's a lot better to reset the control, right? So if I go ahead and take this and I have this animated around my scene, if I ever need to get back to this neutral position, all I have to do is hold down control, middle click, and boom, everything gets reset. So you can see that's what I'm doing across the entire rig, just to make sure that we go back to this neutral position for, again, CFX and anything else we need to add. All right, cool. Well, now that that's done, to control this system, the top of it, that is, because the bottom, it's already controlled the way we want, sans the stretch. We'll go ahead and add that very soon. But to control the top, we should do something like this. So I'm going to go ahead and take path CV1 as well as the path. So I'm going to take this as well. I'm going to go ahead and take both of these, and I'm going to make sure key position when parenting is on. It's always safe to do that for the other CV node. So I'll just go ahead and turn that on in case we want to connect that to another control. But I'm going to go ahead and now take the null for our chain, which is leg root. Notice it already has key position on. So we're going to take that. We're going to take path CV1 and the path as well. We're going to click on the top port to parent these to our control, and that's it. So now if we go to take control, and we start to pull at this, now we're able to control the top. And then to get this to stretch, it's actually really straightforward. We could just go ahead and select our top bone object. And once we're done with this, since our bones are evenly spaced, we could just transfer this to the others once we finish the first function or expression. So we're going to go to the bone tab here. And here is our current length. And let's go ahead and walk through the expression we would use. So we're going to use the arc length expression because we want to track the length of our path, which is the length of our chain. So it's going to look something like this. Arc len, open and close parentheses, and inside this is where we would assign our path object. So we're going to add 2 quotation marks, and inside it's going to be ... slash. And now that we're still on the same level here, we could go ahead and search for our path. Level meaning the level inside of Snake Assassin rig, which is where the rest of the rig is stored. Right, so if I want to come outside of that, I would use another ... slash. And now we're on the very top object level. All right, so I'm just going to make sure we have just one ... slash, and now we're going to go ahead and search for our path, which is just named path1. There it is. So now outside of our last quotation mark, we're now going to use comma space to separate this from our primitive number for that path, which is simply just 0, because there's just one path. And now we're going to go ahead and use another comma space to provide the length. So the start of it is 0, and the end of it is 1. And that's it. We don't have to put the actual length. It's just, hey, where does this start? We want it to start at the very start, which is 0, and end with a value of 1. Now the last thing we need to do is provide the amount of bone objects we have here in this chain. So that is a total of 5. So we can go ahead and divide this by a value of 5. And when we hit enter, take a look. The expression's working, and if we left click, we have the same length, which is really nice. So now we could just go ahead and copy this parameter, right click and choose copy parameter, and go to the other bone objects. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight the others. We're going to go to bone, we're going to go ahead and right click and click on paste relative references. Sweet, so they all have the same length, and now watch this, in no time at all we have a stretchy chain. Again, something else I really love about Houdini. And since curves have normals, so since this path does have normals, something else we get is a nice twist distribution for free. So when we start to rotate this, notice it knows how to twist this chain. So again, some really fun features here in Houdini that makes this entire process enjoyable. All right, great. So on that note, I'd like to go ahead and just talk about the stretch being used for the chain that drives the twist bones. So that would be these bone objects here, leg 1 and leg 2 for the shin and for the thigh. So you'll notice if I go to the bone length here and I left click, I'm actually using a chop network. So this is actually pretty fun. This is a really cool idea from another Houdini user, Saman Koram, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Hopefully I haven't set that in correctly. But here's my chop network, and I'm going to go ahead and jump inside just to show you how this works. So again, really fun stuff. So basically, the first thing I created was this node here, this channel node. So we can go ahead and hit the tab key and type in channel to search that out. And there it is. And then, since we have two bone objects here that we need to track the length of, we can go ahead and click on this add button here to assign an extra set of parameters. Right? So that's basically what I did here. And then I named these, right? So we can access these names later, just to stay organized. So I named this one, in this case, this is shoulder, and then this one's forearm length. And then what we would want to do is provide the length of those actual bone objects. So to find the length, obviously we can go ahead and come outside of this, and we can go ahead and just select the bone object, go to the bone length. We would copy this value, and then we would go back inside of our chop network and paste the value here. So there's the one for the shoulder, and then we paste it for the forearm. Sweet. Next, I created a null, which allows me to basically assign the end result of the stretch. Right? So if we go back to this leg, for example, if I go ahead and come outside of this, and I go to this leg, what you're going to see here is that the leg is actually pointing to the null, right? And it's pointing to the name that I provided the channel that's a part of the null. Sweet, so that's basically how that's working. And now if we were to, before I jump inside of the channel VOP, just want to show you this as well. To find the length, basically using this object null. Now this object node, I'll just go ahead and hit the tab key just to show you how this looks. I'll type in object, and we're looking for object import. And there it is. So we would basically do this. We would search for our target object, which in this case, if I were to go ahead and show you this, I'll go to the object tab. The target object is obviously the control object. The reference object is the root. So the target, and think of this as listed in reverse, right? So the target object is basically, what we are animating, right? So in this case, it's that leg control that I'm pulling around. And then the reference object is the start of the system. So in this case, it would be the root of the chain. So if we go back to this stretchy chain that we just built, the reference object would be this root, right? And if this was for a leg, the target object would be this end null here that I'm pulling around. So that's what we're tracking the distance of. Now going back to this chop network, I want to also point out this. We would then want to switch this to compute distance because we need to track the length in order for this to work. Something else to keep in mind is that once all of this is set up, you're going to want to go to the channel tab, and you're going to want to make sure that you have your channel range set to use current frame. This is super important because after you're done with all of this, your stretch is going to work. But once you come outside of the range, which is set by default, let me show you this. If I go ahead and select this object node, and I go to channel, take a look. It's set to use start and end. So once you leave this range, you're going to notice that this is not working. All right, so you just want to make sure that this is set to use current frame, which is going to do exactly what it's saying. Whatever current frame you're on, it's going to make sure the system is going to work. All right, so really important feature. So again, making sure that our target object, which is the control object, in this case the leg or the arm, and then the reference object once that's assigned, which is the root of the system, so root of the arm or root of the leg, right? Once all of that's assigned, make sure compute is set to distance, and then make sure under channel you have this set to use current frame. Now we could go ahead and jump into the channel VOP. And again, just hitting the tab key, typing in channel to access the channel VOP node. All right, so inside of this, it's actually really fun. So what we do here is we create a way to search out the channels that we've created outside of this, right? So I'm talking about these channels here that are part of the length, right? So the channels that we're using to grab the shoulder and forearm length, and then the channels that we are using to find our distance. All right, so going back to this inside, we can basically hit the tab key to search for a channel. And the name of this changed just slightly, but we're going to go ahead and search for get channel value in this case. All right, cool. So now that we have get channel value, now what we need is a way to assign those parameters that we're looking for outside of this, the channels that are connected into the channel VOP. So it's actually really simple to do that. All we would need to do, let me go ahead and jump back inside of this. All we need to do is go to this first node here, and we could actually leave this alone because here's what this is doing. It's looking for the first connected node, and it's looking for the first channel of that first connected node. So this node here, if I were to go ahead and come outside of that, it's actually pointing to this channel. This is the first channel of the first node. So you'll see that if I go ahead and jump back inside of this, and I go to, let's say, the forearm, again, the first index is set to 0 because that's the first node that's connected into the channel VOP. But you can see that the channel index is changed to 1 because this is the second channel that has been linked to my channel node, which points to the forearm. Right? So with that being said, obviously, this node, which is the arm distance, all this would need is a new input index of 1 because this is the second node that is connected to our VOP network. Here. So here's the first connection, and then there's the second. All right, sweet. And then once we have that, we could then go ahead and create an add node. So just hit the tab key and just search for add. And what we need to do is basically add the length of the shoulder and forearm. Now once we do that, we basically are setting up a way to kind of search to see if the system is or has reached its stretch limit so that we can start to see a cartoony stretch. So the way we do that is we take this length, and this length will eventually add up to this distance here between the two nulls, right? So we basically want to go ahead and take this distance, which tracks the entire length, and then we go ahead and add these two lengths and subtract them to get a value of 0. And then we multiply by half because we're working with two bones. And then at that point, we then go ahead and create another add node. And then this one's cool because this is going to basically factor in this value here that we're getting from our length. And it's going to basically add that to our default value of the bone length, which is here. That's what this V stands for, value. Now what we do is we use a compare node, and this is cool because we could basically say, hey, search to see if this is, in this case, greater than what? Greater than the value that we have specified here in the compare to float. So obviously, since we've subtracted our two values here and we're multiplying by 0.5, that's going to equal to 0. So now we have a cool way of saying once we start to move greater than 0, now we should start to see our stretch work. So here's where we get to use a condition node, which is a two-way switch. So it's the same thing, right? So in this condition, we basically say use the input 1 if the condition is true. So what's input 1? Here it is. So if this condition is true, if we are greater than 0, then factor this in, right? So factor in the multiplication of our zeroed length here, right? So as we start to move beyond that stretch, factor that in, along with, again, our default value that we're getting from the chain, and use that to stretch the chain. It's really straightforward, which is awesome. And then, if the condition is not met, well, that's when we just use the default value here. So pretty awesome stuff. And then we plug that into our output, and that's basically all there is to it. And then, once we make sure to set up this out null, which is really important, because again, it's going to output what we're getting from the channel VOP, right? So we're basically using this, and then we're saying, hey, point to these channels. So going back to the legs, for example, if I go ahead and come outside of this, just hitting the U key, and I go ahead and select one of the bone objects here for the leg, boom. You can see that when we have a close look at the path, see I'm using the chop function, and we're pointing to our kinematic chop network. And then we're looking for that null, and then we're looking for the path to the bone length. All right, so just as a refresher here, that is basically this path here for shoulder and forearm, but in this case, it's for the leg. So if I come outside of that, you can see that I'm looking for the thigh bone's length or the shin's length, and that's how we create our stretch. Cool. So I'll be providing this file so you could have a close look at that if you'd like. There's some things that I won't be able to add to this file because, again, I purchased this model, so I'd have to double check with the artist who made this really awesome character. All right, sweet. So I just wanted to go ahead and walk through how that stretch system was set up. And just going a little bit further here, I'm actually using groups that we can access right here in our node view to organize the rig. So watch this. If I go back to my node view and I go ahead and press Shift-Z, I'm actually using this group, which is kind of like a layer, if you will, to say, hey, here's what I want stored in the group so that I could toggle the visibility on and off. So watch this. If I go ahead and click on, let's say, the smaller blue square, I could use that to hide my controls. Clicking on the larger square will view them. Now, how did I create these groups? Well, all you have to do is go ahead and click on Add and choose Node Group. And there you go. And then if you'd like to assign items, you just select them and then click on the arrow to get it assigned. So really awesome stuff. And then you could remove items from your group as well. And this stuff is also covered in my rigging course and in Michael's as well. So I might just go in and remove this group by just choosing delete. But I just wanted to point out that this is a really awesome hidden feature, if you will. And I like how it's organized, but again, we could just use this to kind of hide or show bone objects. So you'll notice that I'm using a naming convention of capture for anything that is a skin bone. So I could then go ahead and type in the name of all of those by first accessing the find node dialog with the hotkey /. And then we could go ahead and type in, let's say, asterisk capture. So just typing in the name of the bone objects or something that's a part of the naming convention. And then at that point, we could go ahead and double click to choose select all, and then we could assign them to the correct group. And that's how I assigned all of these. So it's a really quick process. All right, awesome. Something else I wanted to point out is the space switching that I have. So notice if I go ahead and take the chest control and I start to rotate that forward, notice it's moving one-to-one with the control object, the head control is. But I could go to this head control and I could go to the parent orient channel and I could start to blend that to 0. And so now what this does is it allows me to keep the head pointed forward as I start to move the chest control. So I find this to be very flexible for character animation. Right? If the head is too rigid, we have a lot of counter keying to do this way. But I would leave this on for the character's flip, right? So going back to the animation, if I just go ahead and undo back to bring those values back, and I'll just go ahead and reset this control by holding down control and middle clicking. You'll see that I'm actually using that value of 1 so that when the character starts to flip, it will come along for the ride. Because if I go ahead and turn that to 0, we're going to have a lot more work to get the head to a point in a way that's stable, right? So this gives us more flexibility for animation, which is really nice. I think I'm using a value of 1 throughout, but just note that you could go ahead and turn that to 0. Again, when I started animating this, I just wanted to do something really quick. But if I was animating this for another project, I might go ahead and start to use channels like this. Especially for creatures, you could do some really fun things with space switches like this. The way this was built was just creating a constraint, so going up here to constraints, and then if I go ahead and click on parent blend, you could go ahead and use this mask to choose what gets constrained. So to have a close look at the head control, so you can see I'm able to toggle off here what I don't want constrained and what I do. To have a close look at the head control, just to show you this, I'll go ahead and press spacebar G. You'll notice that the connect null actually has a constraint for the position, right? So if I go ahead and just jump inside by just double clicking and then going into the constraint and going to the parent node, you can see that its mask is set to position, right? Now if I go ahead and go outside of this, just hitting the U key again a few times. If I now go to the next null, this offset null, and I double click to have a look at the constraint here, you can see that I'm using rotation for this, and this is what I'm actually blending. And to control the blend, I create a custom channel, and I connect it into this node here. So you can see my blend here. If I go ahead and left click, it's pointing to my custom channel. Nice. And obviously to create the custom channel, all you have to do is go ahead and choose the object you want to add it to. So in this case, it just would make sense to add it to the control object. So you can now just go to Edit Parameter Interface, click on this gear icon. And I wanted this to be a float value so that we can have a really smooth transition to blend it. So we could just take the float parameter type and add that wherever we'd like. And just give this a name. Right, so here's the nice name, if you will. This is what we see here, but this is the actual name of the channel that we would use to connect it to another parameter. And then we could also choose our range from here as well. So we could choose 0 to 1 or whatever range we need. And if you also want to create a default value, you could go to the Channels tab and just set your default value here. So if you wanted it to be 1, just go ahead and put in a value of 1 like that. That's it. All right, cool. Then you click on Apply and Accept. I'm going to cancel that though, because I don't want to create anything I just made. That was kind of messy, but I just want to give an idea as to how that was built. All right, sweet. Now the space switch also exists on the blades. Originally, I wanted to have the character release the blades, but just didn't have time for that. But just note that I could go ahead and turn off that weight here if I would like to have this controlled by the world, and then set it to 1 if I want it to blend back to the character's hand. Same thing goes for the knees and elbows. I'd also like to talk about these connect paths. So if I go ahead and select one of these and have a look at that node network. So here's the one for the right leg. So I'll go ahead and jump inside. So as you can see, I'm using object merge nodes to search for my twist control. And then this one searches out the root null that we talked about already. And then I merge those together. Then I use the add SOP just to create a point path. So I set this to group, and there you go. And then I add a color, whatever color I'm using for that side of the rig. And then that's it. So this is one way we could approach that. But you can see that visually we have a way of tracking down where the control is. So if these ever were to get kind of overlapped to a point where it's confusing, we always know where it belongs. So yeah, super helpful stuff. Sweet. So now we can go ahead and quickly talk about skinning. So I'll just go ahead and jump back to the beginning here. And yeah, it's again pretty straightforward process with the model selected. We can go to press the tab key and type in paint if we'd like to start painting to our capture layer. Now before I go ahead and choose that, I just want to just double check that I don't have anything that would throw off the weight painting. All right, cool, there you go. So, we could go ahead and make sure that we are painting to our network here that basically allows the character to deform. So you can see I have a whole bunch, maybe too many of these, but I was just working quickly. But if we want, we can now just go ahead and jump in and select the mesh and go up to our rigging module and choose paint capture weights. Here it is. Or if you want to, you could just go ahead and hit the tab key and type in paint this way. And there it is, paint capture layer. Sweet, so at this point you can see a new node has been added. If you'd like to, let's say, select your bone objects, you could go ahead and do this. You can make sure that your view filter is set to show all objects, right? And now watch this. To select a bone, you could just hold down Control and middle click. So now I'm able to paint to the jaw, right? So pretty fun stuff. And what I'd recommend doing is coming outside of this, we could just go ahead and add some deformation by taking the jaw control, opening it up, right? Maybe even taking the top and just rotating that back. So now we have a way to kind of paint what we'd like to add weighting to. And then we could just jump back into the model and start to paint. So we could just go in and select the the bone we'd like to paint to by holding down Control and the middle mouse button and clicking. Feel free to turn on the wireframe by pressing Shift W, and now you can go ahead and left click to add influence or middle click to remove influence. And if you have a close look at the node, boom, you can see that we can adjust the opacity from here and our radius, which is nice. And then under the operation, this is basically showing us what the capture region is that we're painting. So that's nice as well. So yeah, you can do a whole bunch of really cool things with Houdini's approach to weight painting. Another feature I really like is the edit capture weights. I liked it so much, in fact, that I created a quick video and next to it was an emoji with the mouth open. I was like, I can't believe you could do this. But basically with this, with edit capture weights, it'll create a capture override node. And basically it allows you to say, hey, let me go ahead and select a few points. And now I get these sliders. I get cool sliders along the bone objects that I can use to go ahead and start to add or remove influence. So it's very interactive and fun. So that's what edit capture weights does. And here's how that looks. So here's the capture override node. And this capture override node is nice because you could actually assign capture regions and then groups that are affected by the capture region. So just to show you an example of that, here I've created a capture region for my lower lid, and then I've assigned all of the points of the lower lid so that I can go ahead and get them deforming with this capture region. So pretty nice stuff you could do inside of Houdini to save some time with weight painting. Yeah, so I just wanted to walk you through that process. Now on that note, I think it'd be really nice to be able to maybe bring over some useful tools that I've found in other applications like Maya and the former XSI or Softimage. That was also really fun. And then Blender as well. Blender has a really cool smoothing tool. But something that I found that was A little challenging was being able to, let's say, take a group of points and just smooth those group of points, right? So like Maya, for example, when you go ahead and select a group of points that you like to smooth, you can just go ahead and click on the hammer skin weights tool. And then Blender has something similar. It has a smoothing tool. And then for Exercise, the reason why I mentioned that is because it had a really cool tool, Local Reassign, that allows you to select components. And then you could go ahead and select the bone objects that you'd like to reassign the components to. So for example, and I've built a tool like this in Maya, where you could go ahead and take a certain amount of faces, and then you get to choose the joints that you'd like to have those faces influenced by. So that helps with a lot of pulling and snagging, right? So, as we start to kind of pull at this, if we had a lot of pulling underneath the armpit, you could basically go ahead and take all of those faces and then choose the bones you'd like to reweight them to, and then click go, and boom, it's done, right? They're all reassigned to the selected bone objects. So I use that quite a lot when skinning my own characters to save a lot of time. But you'll notice that Houdini's skinning method of biharmonic is actually really solid, and it saves us a bunch of time. It even did a really good job around the mouth. I had to paint weights, of course, but it did a really good job. So if I were to go to rigging and just choose capture geometry, here's what I'm talking about, the capture type biharmonic, which basically is creating a cage around the entire mesh, and then it's using sorcery to distribute weight, which is really nice. Now, something else that's really nice is individual bones. So this basically allows us to say, hey, I just want to choose the bone objects that I would like to skin to. So that is a really nice added feature here in Houdini as well. And then you could go ahead and set your iterations if you need to. 1 should be fine, but you can go ahead and increase this a bit more to like 10 or so to get some better results, but I find that 1 works really well in most cases. Now, before I move on to the animation, I just want to talk a little bit more about the rig here, and I'd like to talk about the eyelids. So notice I have this kind of fleshy eye setup. So as I start to pull out the control object, you'll see that the eyes start to kind of move around and it looks very fleshy-like. So the way this works is I'm actually using expressions here that are connected to the rotation of this bone object. And you can see what's driving this. It's the rotation of the eye, and then as a multiplier, I'm able to basically go to the actual eyelid channel, which is found on this main controller. So if I go ahead and select this, you'll notice that I have access to the upper and lower lids, so I can go ahead and have the character blink and things like that. And I wish the deformations were a bit better on this, but notice I've been painting on a triangulated mesh, so that's not really too fun, but it was still okay. Houdini's tools made this pretty enjoyable, and the results are pretty promising still, so no worries there. But that's basically how the fleshy eye was set up. So again, just to show you the expression I'm using, it's the rotation of the main eye for the fleshiness, and then multiplying that by 0.5 to get a smoother result to soften that up. And then I'm adding to that the custom channel, which allows me to control the upper lid that's connected to my main eye controller. So that's that. And then if I go ahead and have a look at the eye bone object and left click, you'll notice that it's the translation of my control that drives that. So here's the expression for that. So if I go ahead and take my control object and I start to translate this, that's what's driving the rotation of that eye, and then the rotation is then driving the rotation of the surrounding eyelid bones. Sweet. And then for the eyebrows, I'm just using 1 bone object, but you can see that with just 1, we could get something that's pretty expressive. So we can go ahead and translate and then rotate that as well. Awesome. So yeah, that's a quick look at the character rig. And we could talk more about this later on, but just wanted to give you an overview. Now we could go ahead and talk about animation. And for one, again, what I like to do is go ahead and create what I like to call selection sets, which they'd be called in Maya, which allows me to quickly grab the controls, whether it's all controls or whether it's controls I want to use to kind of translate the body. For example, if I wanted to translate this character, everything's in IK right now. I didn't create for kinematics. There was just no time for that. But if I wanted to translate this character, I would grab these controls here, along with the center of gravity control, and use this to translate my model, right? And then I may include the knees and elbows. But then I can go ahead and take all of these. I can go ahead and press Shift-Z and store that in a group named Move Body, and that's what Move Body does. So if I go ahead and select these objects by clicking on the yellow box, the bright yellow box, notice I'm able to select all of the objects that allow me to move my rig. So that was useful for the flip animation and just having the character translate from point A to point B. So super helpful tools here in Houdini to do things like that. And what I did was I also went in and I blocked in the performance first. So to do that, we could just go ahead and head over to our preferences. So we'll go to Edit, Preferences, and choose Animation. And take a look. Here's where we get to choose our default tangent types. So right now it's set to Bezier, which is the default, but in order to get a stepped approach, I switched this to constant. So once this was set to constant, I was able to block in the animation. So maybe we could do this now. I'll go ahead and click Accept, and I'm going to just create a null here. Sweet. And right here in this first frame, I'll just go ahead and hold down Alt and left click. And you can see how convenient it is to set keyframes. So I could either left click while holding down Alt to keyframe the entire transform list, or if I just want one channel, I'll just go ahead and bring my cursor to that channel, hold down Alt and left click to create the key. And now I could go to another frame, let's say on 962, and I'll just go ahead and translate this over to the side. And I have auto key on, which I really like to use. So you could go ahead and left click to access the drop down to turn on auto key. And now you can see that the null here is going to be stepped. It's going to go from point A to point B, and it's going to be blocky. And to see the F curves, you could just go ahead and hold down Shift and middle click on the channel. And then I'll go ahead and press spacebar G to have a closer look. And there you go. You can see the stepped keys now. Yeah, so pretty fun stuff. And this works like any other animation editor. So you have tangents, and you have, obviously your keys that you could slide this around with. So if I wanted to, I can go ahead and, let's say, deselect and then press spacebar G to grab all of my keys, or not grab them, but just to frame them up here in the editor. And then I could go ahead and left click and drag to select the keys. And if I go ahead and select these bars that surround the key, and I drag left and right, I'm able to use this to slide the timing, right? If I go ahead and select the key itself and I left click, I'm able to move the value of that. So again, if I want to adjust the timing, select this and then just grab the bar around the key and left click and drag. But if I want to adjust the value, just select the key itself and drag that up, which I like. It's a very convenient way to make sure that you don't accidentally slide the key to a point you don't want it. So that's nice. And then you'll notice that we also have a ghosting effect, if you will, on our function curves. So what's nice is we could just go in and start to adjust these and take a look. I get a printout of where the F curve once was. And if I want to swap it back, should just be able to right click and choose revert to active snapshot. So that's nice. But if I want to keep it, I just move the key up and hit enter. So yes, on top of this, we can work with animation layers, which is nice. So let's say if I wanted to create a layer for, let's say the character's chest control, maybe to have that thrust forward. I can go ahead and select this, and I could then go to the animation layer section, go to the gear to the right, and I could click on create layer mixer. Sweet, now you can see the path to the mixer here, and we can go ahead and leave this as is to make sure it points to the correct path, and we'll go ahead and click OK. There you go, so now we have a base layer. Sweet. And then if you'd like, you go ahead and now click on add layer to now have a clean slate. So take a look at this. Now we could start to push this further, and we are working non-destructively. So we're not actually throwing off anything on the original animation, which is on the base layer, which we can access by selecting that. So I'll just go to layer 1 and go to a point where the character is like moving forward, and maybe have that chest control come forward a bit more. So what I'll do is first go back to preferences. So I'll go to edit, preferences, animation, and I'll make sure that this isn't going to be stepped. So I'll go to switch this back to Bezier for smooth keys. Click accept. All right, sweet. So now here on frame 1014, I'll just go ahead and press the K key to set transform keys. And then as she moves forward, I have auto key on, so all I should need to do is go ahead and just translate that control forward like that. And of course the arms are going to need to be tweaked, but I just wanted to point out how cool this is. So now in no time at all, I have this really cool layer on top of my existing performance. Sweet. And then I could go ahead and keyframe the weight on and off. So if I decide to, I could go ahead and just go to the layer and say, I don't like that, by setting that to 0. Or I could go ahead and set it to 1 if I do like it. So really cool features we could do here inside of Houdini. I can keyframe this. So maybe I'll go ahead and keep it on frame 21. I'll go ahead and right click and choose key. But then I'll, a few frames later, just go ahead and set this to 0. And with auto key, that'll save me some time. So yeah, some really fun features here, some really cool animation controls. Now you might be wondering, how do we set up ghosting and things like that? Well, that's actually done on the geometry. So let me go ahead and show you how that works. And I'll show you how I've set it up on this character. So you'll notice that if we were to select this model, we can go to the miscellaneous tab and enable onion skinning. So I'll go ahead and choose full deformation. All right, sweet. So now we can see this kind of onion skinning effect across the entire model. And it does get kind of heavy, but at least we get to see, you know, some kind of representation of our timing, which is nice. Now, if you hit the D key to go to your display options, you can then go to your scene tab, and this is where you could go ahead and change the amount of frames you see before and after, but you could also do this. You could change your coloring. So I could set the after to red, and then, you know, the before, go ahead and change those. So I've actually changed the after to blue and the before to red. So you could do some really fun things like that, and then change your skin opacity to whatever you prefer. But do keep in mind that this gets pretty taxing. All right, so yeah, that's how we could go ahead and start to use onion skinning. And it should be on. So if I go back to those display settings, it should be on by default. So that's nice. So if I turn that off, it's not there. Cool. But I might just go ahead and turn it off here. I like to keep that option on in case I like to use it. Now, another way we could go ahead and keep track of our arcs and our timing is to use the trail SOP. And here's how I did this with this rig. I actually took the geometry, right? So I took the character's body, and then I jumped inside of this SOP network for the body. So I basically just cloned this and then jumped inside, and I removed a lot of the skinning nodes that I didn't really need because I just want to keep track of a point that is already skinned decently. And then you can see here that I'm basically using a blast SOP to get rid of everything except for just one point. And then I recolor the point, and then I use a trail. So here I've set the trail length to 20, and the increment, which is essentially the spacing, I've set that to 1. Yeah, and yeah, just using, for the most part, the default settings for the trail. So you can see it's set to preserve original. Cool. And then to get a better idea of how it looks, I'm using copy to point with a sphere. And then to color it, it's really simple. Vex, I'm just using CD equals the point position. So as this starts to go through, you'll see that the color starts to change. So if anything, that's entertaining, right? The color change. But hey, you get the idea. This can be super useful for just tracking our timing and our arcs as well. Especially as we start to lunge forward, you can see how helpful this system is. And again, I'm just using the geometry of the model and just extracting a point and then coloring that point. But keep in mind that this can get a little heavy depending on how many you have. So, make sure to only use it if you need to, but if you don't need to, you could just go ahead and turn it off and your performance will improve in your scene. Sweet. All right, so yeah, that's a quick look at some of the animation tools, and there are many others to cover, but I just wanted to point out that Houdini has some really useful tools for animating inside of this program. If you want to copy and paste keys, you could just go ahead and left click and copy the key by pressing Control C, and then going to the frame you like to paste on, Control V. Right? So fun things like that, which I love. It's just very, very user-friendly. Cool. All right, well, with that being said, I'll just go ahead and quickly talk about cloth. So this character had some really cool cloth, but obviously wasn't really designed too well for actual C effects. Meaning, had to kind of do a few things on top of this just to make sure that the resolution was good enough for this character's performance. So you can see that here at the top, I actually skimmed this so that I could use it later to pin the cloth in case things got out of hand. So as she does her flip, if it wasn't for pinning, the cloth would go over her head and it would look kind of silly. So I'm using things like pinning to make sure that the cloth does not do that. And in order to do so, I basically made sure that the cloth was skinned first so that I had something to pin throughout the animation. So here are the constraints for that. Sweet. And then I basically went in and brought in the body and boots for collisions, and those get connected here. Awesome. And then here's where I start to assign my constraints. So here's the one for the shoulder, attach the geometry points, and there you have it. All right, so if we were to have a look at this constraint, which we can, I'll just go ahead and zoom in with spacebar G. So these are the points along the shoulders, just to make sure that we could keep this pinned so it doesn't fall over her head. And then this one for the spine, I'm basically using that to keep the back of the cape from again, falling over her head. So you see I'm using a soft pin and pin to target for that. So pretty straightforward stuff. And then I just kind of clean up the attributes of the cape using attribute delete, and then group delete, and then I went ahead and I cached that out and smoothed it. So the geometry was pretty good, but it just needed to be up-resed a little bit more to get some better results, and that's why I'm using the remesh up here. All right, sweet. Well, let's look at Vellum, and then the last thing I want to go ahead and talk about is the camera. So what I really love about cameras in Houdini is the fact that you could actually just work on a basic camera move, meaning you could just go ahead and take the camera and do some really basic keyframes, and then to add the handheld feel, you could just go ahead and add motion effects. So maybe we could go ahead and do this now. I'll go ahead and set my time range. So I'll just go ahead and click at the bottom left-hand corner to go ahead and set the global range to 1001, which is the start of the animation. And then I'll click apply. So now that everything's there, I'll then go ahead and create a new camera. So I'll just go ahead and use this view. And I'll hold down Control and click so that it captures this view. And I'll go ahead and make sure that the lock icon is on, so that whenever we move the camera, we're actually moving our new shot camera, which is here. All right, so on frame 1, I'll go ahead and hold down Alt and left click to set translate and rotate keys. Now as the character starts to move forward, we can start to back up the camera. And again, have auto key on just to save some time here. So we can start to move the camera back just a bit. And I'm just going for a really basic camera move to get angles that I want, just kind of roughing this in. Maybe we get more of a lower view as she just starts to do her flip. And then she does her slam move. We'll go ahead and focus in on that. And there you go. So we have some nice camera animation, and it's very rough, right? So yeah, nothing too impressive about that, but here's where we get to take the quality and push it even further with no time at all. So watch this. What I can now do, I'll go ahead and now add motion effects, and I'll just add it to one channel, which is the up and down, or the pitch axis, or the rotate X, right? So if I go middle, click, and drag, this is the pitch axis, the rotate X. So I'll just go ahead and right click, and I'll choose, where is it? Motion effects, and I'll use noise. And then you can see we have this cool graph. If you ever lose this, by the way, you could always get back to this. I'll go ahead and hit the up key with the U key to show you how to get back to that. So there's the motion effects chop network. If you go to your motion effects tab here at the top, it'll take you right back to that graph. And then you could use the middle mouse button to start to adjust your view here. I'm also using Alt, and I'm using the right mouse button to stretch this view. Sweet, so there you have it. And then you have a few really awesome parameters to control the spacing, to control the roughness, and the amplitude. So if I go back to my scene view, I can start to adjust the amplitude and animate that if I'd like. But now when I go ahead and play this back, take a look, in no time at all, we get this really cool handheld feel from our camera. So it's really exciting stuff. The fact that we could just go ahead and quickly add some camera animation and just polish it by just adding motion effects. Just fun stuff. So sorry for talking your ears off, but there's a really fun tool set in Houdini that people don't really use often, and I think the character tools in Houdini are fine enough where we can actually create some believable performances, some high quality animation. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the tool set and see if it can be used for your pipeline. With that said, thanks for listening, and I'll see you around.